I'm kind of an unusual case in a sense that I was diagnosed really, really very young. I was only 4, but I would say I'm more like an intellectual and awareness level. I didn't actually like fully understand it as a concept, and that being somehow a marker of me being different, quote unquote, in the eyes of other people until much later on. It wasn't until I was around like 10 or 11 that it really truly hit me that, yeah, I do have support needs and I do have a different sense of time and space and direction from starting to pick up on discussions with people who were supporting me within the school system and also my peers being aware of something being inherently different about me. But yeah, it definitely did take some time. I think I was very lucky where I was very, I didn't really realize until much later on in my life, but I think I might have very much been drawn to people who were neurodivergent or disabled, or even people that like came out as gay later in their life, or like were from an immigrant background. And I think in a way, that was the one thing that grounded me and got me through the whole experience. But in some ways, it was kind of a lonely experience because I grew up in Canada and really, we don't really have very much in terms of resources. We don't really even have any charities around dyspraxia. So, really, no educators, no one who was involved in the support process in any way knew that much about it. They knew more about it in terms of what it looked like in comparison to autism and ADHD, but not so much dyspraxia. So it felt in many ways like growing up with a bit of a rare disease, even though, like, obviously it's not rare. And the neurodiversity movement teaches us to look at it less from a disease framework. But yeah, I think my quality of life didn't fully improve in terms of feeling less lonely going through the journey of it all till I started to meet other neurodivergent people in my late 20s. I I mean, in some regards, my British peers, I was quite impressed in terms of how much more, even if it wasn't the most perfect awareness, how much more dyspraxia would at least come up as a joke in a TV program, or things like Daniel Radcliffe coming out as openly dyspraxic when he was only a child back in his Harry Potter years. And in some ways, I really admired that. But in a way, it's awareness, but it's not, because the awareness is to the extent of the stereotype of what it looks like on the surface of, oh, they're clumsy, oh, they're dropping things on the floor. But there isn't enough an acknowledgement of what the deeper cause of what is going on actually is. And really, that's just the problem. And I've spent time living in Marrakesh, and that's a little bit less awareness. But I think in many ways, growing up in a system that there isn't really any awareness, anyways, has given me years and years of practice of making it make sense to people. And that's been a very useful tool for me. Yeah, I think the big one was more so trying to pigeonhole it into, oh, it involves sensory issues, so it must just be autism. Or it's clumsiness, so you're not actually disabled, so maybe you don't need the special education support that you are claiming that you need. Or your sense of direction being impaired and struggling with movement based directions, that is just you not listening hard enough or not trying hard enough. And that's very much the root of what a lot of the advocates are often getting at in terms of trying to help people understand the larger how the brain works part of things. Yeah, I was lucky in some regards, but unlucky in others. I think it was great that I got special education support. I feel like that's a real privilege to have had early on in my life, especially in comparison to my peers that were diagnosed way later. But at the same time, I think I would have benefited from more resources that gave me language to understand it all early on. And that would have made a big difference. And also more dyspraxic people I can identify with. That took so many years. It wasn't until recently that I could count on even one hand openly dyspraxic people who were in positions of power or who were public figures that were just going about their lives and thriving. And that meant that it took me a really long time to understand it as a strength as much as a set of medical symptoms. Yeah, it was interesting because I was at a networking event the other day with my spouse, and this came up. I had only about a minute to describe it in total because he was hyping me up a bit. And the thing that often comes up is the root of the matter, which is the practice of carrying out and understanding the active movement when it comes to translating just a communicated thought of going left down that street and then translating that into what that means. Or if someone says you need to move your arm in this direction and then put this dress on, just to use a random example, then to know cognitively immediately in your head exactly what that would mean. It's that active translation from the movements we do every day into actual actions. Oh, I would say that the most immediate ones that always come to mind is empathy towards difference and creative problem solving. Empathy towards difference in a sense that I think it's helped me grow up with a great deal of tolerance towards everything that can make a person different in a broader sense, and a great deal of openness and patience towards embracing that, and resilience in times that are not so great, and creative thinking in a sense that I'm so used to the variable of something not working about trying to get to an unfamiliar place or trying to learn something new that I've got very, very good at like figuring out outside the box ways of figuring out how to communicate things simply or to solve a problem that many of my peers would not immediately think of. It was a thought that took many years to figure out what it could possibly look like. As I grew up in an environment where people didn't understand dyspraxia all that well, I realized that the most valuable ways I taught others around me what it actually all meant was through the act of telling stories. That's what always attracted me to writing as a craft as well. And I realized that I could it would be a great tool to put out into the world my years upon years of stories I had collected in journals of things that I noticed about how my mind works over a period of time from being a child to my young adulthood. And I realized I could turn that into something. So finally I did, and that's what stumbling through space and time ended up being. It's been fairly mixed. The really positive were the things that came from everything from parents to people that who have helping and supporting based job roles, to actual dyspraxic people, of things like a Reddit user saying that it felt like this person was telling me my narrative, to things like people sending me just kind emails saying, thanks so much. I finally understand how my daughter's brain works a little bit better. But the negative were more just people not really getting it, of wanting a different perspective than what I was offering. But that's to be expected as an author. Well, there was two motivating factors. It somewhat helped that that time around, I was approached by a fan of my first book who happened to work at Bloomsbury, who said, I read your chapter on university and I want to publish something on how students with dyspraxia can navigate their experiences. But really the reason I said yes was because much of the people who had been diagnosed later in life within my peer group were all women who found out for the first time that they were dyspraxic in their university years and felt very lost and under-resourced. And I wanted to do something for them. It will be published on July the 9th, 2026, so out in the summer. And really all major bookstores, Amazon, Waterstones, all those major ones. And if you can't find it, my advice to readers is always just, as a reader, you have a great deal of power to go in your local bookstore and say, why don't you have this book available yet? I think that the biggest thing that is the frustration that people come across a lot is a difference in communication, and really just having an openness to communicating ideas, communicating instructions in more than just the verbal way, and even making that the normal, not necessarily just if you disclose, then we'll do that. Because there's a great deal of shame about speaking up and just saying hey, could you send me a calendar invite, or could you write down the meeting minutes, or could you say exactly where you want me to go in writing rather than just saying go over there and there and turn left. So I think that's the one that often when I get asked about this at speaking engagements and such, that I really try to remind people of, to make more than one method of communication normal. I would say just to start doing your research, start by looking at Crystal Shaw's project, Dyspraxia. She offers probably one of the least defensive dyspraxia definitions on the internet I've seen. And start by reading resources like that, looking up what other dyspraxics are out there. Really try to find your people. And that is a good starting point for starting to have the language, which is so essential in order to thrive in your environment. Start to have an awareness of what exactly is normal. And work on that self-advocacy piece. As you start to look at these resources, you will notice things. You will notice that, yeah, that does speak to my experiences. That's my work experience. That was my school experience. And consider how, with the least amount of money and resources, others can help you, and start to have that language that makes sense to you for communicating that. Yeah, just more a sense of normalization of what dyspraxia looks like. I think it's the one that my ongoing frustration is that it often gets forgotten about in neurodiversity circles and conversations. And to see it as much of a part of things as autism, dyslexia, etc., but also a beautiful part of the larger tapestry of all that. Yeah, I work as a neurodiversity consultant. I work on resources on that side, on the writing, editing, speaking things side of things. So if you follow me on social media, you'll see my future projects around that. And I'll definitely be writing books in the future. Nothing formally planned yet, but I do have a meeting with an editorial assistant, Bloomsbury, in about 2 weeks. So that should make things a bit more final on that side. And yeah, that's the crux of it. Keep speaking, keep writing articles, keep working with my clients.